Get him.
Whether you know him because of his legendary action films or from memes such as the one where a cobra dies after biting his leg, there's no denying the impact that Chuck Norris has had on pop culture. His name is up there with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Sylvester Stallone, and of course Arnold Schwarzenegger as the men who helped shape the 1980s action movie era. With his US Air Force service and black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Tang Soo Do, he's a certified badass. And who could forget his role in Way of the Dragon? Today, we'll explore 12 of his most underrated films. Get ready for roundhouse kicks and action-packed stories, but before we get into the action, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. An Eye for an Eye, 1981. In this movie, directed by Steve Carver, Chuck Norris plays Detective Sean Kane, an undercover cop working in San Francisco's narcotics division. He and his partner, Dave Pierce, played by Terry Kaiser, pay a visit to their informant, Tony Montoya. Montoya told the cops that he had a big scoop that would help them break the investigation wide open. However, the meeting goes pretty badly. Instead of getting the name of the drug dealer, Pierce gets shot, run over, and burnt. Kane tries his best to save his partner, even throwing one of the killers out of the window of a third-story building, but Pierce is dead. On top of all that, Captain Stevens, Kane's superior, reprimands him for killing the bad guy in public view. Things weren't looking good for Kane. His superiors tell him to stay away and lay low, but Kane wasn't going to do that. Linda, Dave's journalist girlfriend, also gets killed when she gets a bit too close to solving the case. So, seeing the injustice, Kane and Linda's father pair up to seek revenge. The whole story is a pretty cliche revenge film, and you can see the twists way ahead of when they're actually revealed. However, the gritty aesthetic of San Francisco back in the 80s, coupled with the splendid casting, really brings the whole film together. I mean, they got Christopher freaking Lee playing the main villain, and Captain Stevens is played by Richard Roundtree. How cool is that? The movie has a strong anti-drug theme, which is pretty much a staple in all of Norris's 80s films, but it's mostly Norris's martial arts skills that shine here. I mean, literally. The poster has the tagline, "Kane's justice is revenge. Kane's weapon is himself." So of course, Chuck Norris gets to show off his martial arts skills. But here's the thing, despite all of the good qualities, a lot of fans feel like this movie doesn't do justice to Norris's talents. The stunts are a tad weak and a little bit too cluttered, and it's clear that they could have done a lot better. That's why this film has a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes. In his review of the film, critic Gene Siskel mentions that maybe Chuck Norris did this movie to break out of the stereotypical action hero star role. It's definitely a little cheesy, but if sloppy stunts don't bother you as much and you love seeing characters going on a revenge ride, then my guy, this movie could be for you. Sidekicks, 1992. Now, The Karate Kid came out in 1984, and since then, Daniel LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi have lived in our heads pretty much rent-free. But with Chuck Norris's popularity back in the day, I'm sure a lot of you daydreamed about the Karate Kid story beat for beat, but with Chuck Norris, right? I mean, I know I have, and so imagine my pleasure when I came across Sidekicks. Although this movie is considered to be a Karate Kid ripoff because of the, very similar plot, this movie is absolutely made for kids. Barry Gabrewski, who played the late Jonathan Brandis, is our main character. He's a bullied kid with asthma. He's always daydreaming about standing up to his bullies, but in his wishful imagination, he's not a wimpy asthmatic kid. No, he's the Chuck Norris's sidekick. We see the parodied versions of Norris's films in Barry's daydreams, clearly emulating the childlike wonder and imagination a kid has, and it's absolutely adorable. The take-home message of this film is self-reliance. Through the power of imagination and, frankly, a little bit of Chuck Norris obsession, Barry eventually manages to get over his insecurities and trains for a karate tournament where he ultimately faces off against his bully. The movie is the perfect blend of silly but sentimental, hard-hitting but comical, and honestly, we kind of love it. The casting is really good with Mako, Julia Nixon, Richard Mall, and Joe Piscopo. Chuck Norris played a key role in the making of this film as he suggested the idea of making it. He and Jim McIngvale, a Houston furniture outlet owner, made it together as a pet project. When the movie was released, it got a lukewarm welcome, but over the years, it's definitely grown into a cult classic. At a Nashville Comic-Con panel, Chuck Norris himself said that he'd love to make a sequel for the movie as it holds a special place in his heart. The Rotten Tomatoes score for this film is only 26%, but don't let that stop you from experiencing this creative masterpiece, which will definitely give you a wave of nostalgia. The The Hitman, 1991. Do you guys ever think about Chuck Norris in a mullet? Well, after watching The Hitman, you'll definitely find yourself thinking about it a lot. I'm not kidding. In this movie, our hero is Cliff Garrett. He's a cop placed in Seattle, and when he attempts to do a drug bust, he's shot by his own partner, Ronnie Delaney. Garrett is rushed into the ER, and although he dies momentarily, he's brought back with a defibrillator. Using this opportunity, Garrett's supervisor, Chambers, fakes Garrett's death and gives him a whole new identity, Danny Grogan, the Hitman. And yes, Danny/Cliff is played by the one and only Chuck Norris. To make sure nobody can recognize him, Cliff decides to grow a mullet for Danny, and boy, this mullet really changes the way you look at Chuck Norris. He goes from a handsome, fresh-faced cop to a gruff-looking hitman who's out for blood. As Danny, Cliff infiltrates the criminal organization that has been causing rampant chaos all over town. Once inside, he systematically and savagely takes out all the mobsters with ease while showing off his twisted sense of humor. Directed by Aaron Norris, Chuck's brother, this movie tries to explore the gritty, dark, and murderous side of Chuck's character. The action scenes are packed with rough stunts that'll make you go, oh my god. The camera work is excellent, and thanks to the quality of the cameras used, this movie seems older than it actually is, which really hits the sweet spot. When the movie was released, it was technically a success because it earned $4.6 million at the box office, but reviews of this film are mixed at best. It has a score of 13% on Rotten Tomatoes. Leonard Martin critiqued the movie, saying that it's fairly awful, and while Norris gets to play the central role in the plot after a decade, that's not nearly enough for the movie's redemption. But he did appreciate the stunt work of the movie. So if you want to see Chuck Norris beating up people savagely and killing mobsters with a sick mullet, then we definitely recommend this movie. Watch it with some friends, you'll have a blast laughing at how ridiculous it is. Lone Wolf McQuade, 1983. Chuck Norris got extremely popular because of his TV show Walker, Texas Ranger, right? But did you know that that TV show was inspired by a film? That film, my friends, is Lone Wolf McQuade. Directed by Steve Carver, this film follows a retired Marine named J.J. McQuade. Currently, McQuade works as a Texas Ranger. He doesn't like working with anyone, hence the nickname Lone Wolf. He lives in an old, dilapidated house with no one but his pet wolf who keeps him company. The opening scene of the film gives us an idea about McQuade's levels of badassery. He literally fights off Mexican bandits and horse thieves in the opening moments, and he comes out of that intense battle with barely a scratch on him. He saves a bunch of Texas state troopers, and once that's done, he dusts himself off and goes to El Paso, Texas, to attend a retirement ceremony for his friend Dakota. We quickly learn that McQuade, despite his reclusive nature, actually maintains a very good relationship with his ex-wife and teen daughter. He also likes Bobby, his daughter's boyfriend, who had recently enlisted in the army. It's evident that he loves his family and is very close with them. That is why it makes complete sense when McQuade goes out on a prowl after his daughter gets gravely injured after her car is pushed into a ravine and her boyfriend is shot dead. Watching McQuade slowly put together the clues and solve the mystery that led to his daughter getting injured is harrowing to watch. McQuade loses his friends and budding lover in the process of getting revenge, and seeing him take that grief and in turn turn it into anger that he unleashes on his enemies is a treat to watch. Up until this movie, Chuck Norris had a particular image about him on screen. Carver, who had previously worked with Norris for An Eye for an Eye, wanted to portray Norris as a much more rugged character, and wanted Norris to drink beer on screen and sell that bad boy image that Carver had in his head. But Norris was reluctant to abide by these directions, as he really wanted to be a good role model for the kids who looked up to him. How sweet. The movie's final climactic fight scene is absolutely amazing, but here's a fun fact for you guys. Neither Chuck Norris nor David Carradine used stunt doubles for this fight. Every cool bit of stunt work you see in that scene is done by the actors, and they did that because they wanted to capture the emotions of the audience. Carradine and Norris wanted to capture and recreate the essence of the famous Roman Colosseum fight scene in The Way of the Dragon. Carradine stated that even though they didn't manage to do that photographically, they did manage to do it as per the fighting styles. While Carradine's moves are very loose and flowy, Norris's movements are extremely sharp and solid. Both actors were very happy with the result of 4 days of grueling shooting, despite old injuries opening up and new injuries being acquired. And that, my friends, is why this movie deserves to be appreciated. There's nothing more enjoyable than seeing two actors having the time of their lives while doing a scene. Originally, this movie was rated R, but Norris appealed the decision, and finally, the film was rated PG. Overall, this movie grossed around $12 million in the US. The film was actually written with Clint Eastwood in mind, but then the role was given to Chuck Norris, and that was the best decision because even Roger Ebert enjoyed seeing Norris play the Lone Ranger. Todd McCarthy wrote in Variety that this movie effectively showed both sides using anything and everything as their weapons, which would definitely impress action film fans. This film does fly under the radar quite a bit, but maybe by the end of this video, it won't so much. Hero and the Terror, 1988. In 1982, Michael Blodgett wrote a novel titled Hero and the Terror. 6 years later, it got adapted into a movie starring Chuck Norris with William Tannen in the director's chair. By the end of the 80s, everyone knew Chuck Norris as the action film icon, but martial arts wasn't the only thing Chuck had to offer. Chuck Norris plays the role of Danny O'Brien. He's a Los Angeles-based cop who prefers working alone and often rushes into situations without any backup. For several years, O'Brien had been following the work of a serial killer named The Terror, whose real name is Simon Moon. The Terror usually targets women and kills them by breaking their necks and hauling their corpses back to his secret hideout in an abandoned amusement park. One time, Danny gets attacked by Simon, and in the kerfuffle that follows, Simon falls off a ladder and is knocked unconscious. When backup arrives, everyone assumes that Danny is the one who apprehended this notorious serial killer. Simon was taken to jail, and Danny was celebrated as a hero. But Simon is not the kind of killer who stays in custody for long. He cut through the bars and stole a laundry van, and while making a hasty escape, Simon loses control of the car and falls into a cliff face. Everyone thinks Simon is dead and breathes a sigh of relief. But then, 3 years later, bodies start showing up, and now it's up to O'Brien to truly capture the Terror once and for all. This movie does a fantastic job of showing us just how charming Chuck Norris can be on screen. He masterfully showcases his charisma while also flexing his martial arts skills. Also, Jack O'Halloran goes all out as the mute killer who's practically unstoppable. His character in the movie is very similar to Non in Superman films, another character that he played himself. This movie might have done a little better if he had gotten a bit more screen time. Even though this movie has the hilariously embarrassing score of 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, it's kind of enjoyable as a slick action thriller.
Get him.
Top Dog, 1995. Buddy cop films are usually well received by the general public. However, when Aaron Norris's film Top Dog came into theaters, things didn't go as planned. The movie came out in 1995, right after the Oklahoma City bombing. As the movie deals with a lot of dark themes, mostly focusing on white nationalists, KKK members, Aryan nations, and neo-Nazis, the movie bombed at the box office. The movie is basically about Chuck Norris and his dog investigating and protecting the city of San Diego from terrorists and bombings. The premise is fantastic, but sadly the timing and the way the subject matters were handled in the movie didn't sit right with a lot of critics. The tonality of the film was extremely child-friendly, even though the movie's themes were extremely heavy. This movie has a whopping 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, but don't let that change your mind about watching Chuck Norris and his canine partner named Reno working on solving cases together.
Out, Will.
Invasion USA, 1985. If an action movie is set on Christmas, does that make it a Christmas movie? This is something that has plagued Die-Hard fans forever. Well, you can add Invasion USA to the list too, if it has any fans. Set during Christmas, this movie follows a bunch of Russian terrorists who show up in Florida and start shooting everything in their path. They ride around in airboats in the Everglades, and eventually they blow up Chuck's little shack. Not only that, they almost killed his armadillo. Now listen, I can watch a lot of people getting killed on screen, no problem, but killing or nearly killing a pet on screen is completely unacceptable. So when they almost killed Chuck's armadillo, they signed their own death warrants, and I stand by it. They had it coming. Thus began the rampage of our 80s John Wick. Chuck Norris's character, Matt Hunter, a former CIA agent, dishes out broken bones left, right, and center. He ruthlessly gets rid of the terrorists, and overall, it's a fun movie to watch. Now, Roger Ebert gave this movie 0.5 stars out of 4, as in his eyes, this movie was an idiotic thriller that's so bad that you can't even laugh at it. Other critics like Paul Attanasio and Gene Siskel seem to share the same opinion. There's no doubt that the premise is terrific, but the movie itself is a bit outrageous. Later in an interview, Norris himself said that he felt some of the sequences in this movie were a bit too much. He also never worked with Joseph Zito, the director of this film again, because of all this, and also for not letting Whoopi Goldberg play the role of the female journalist we see in the film. The Delta Force, 1986. Now, I know a lot of you will say that the Delta Force is extremely popular and there's no need for us to include it in this video, but we believe that this movie doesn't get as much respect or popularity as it deserves. This film is based on the TWA 847 hijacking that occurred in 1985, but they take some creative liberty and add a layer of fantasy to it, especially the way Delta Force operated. Chuck Norris is Major Scott McCoy, who returned to action for this mission. He's the deputy commander of the Delta Force. Alongside him, we got Lee Marvin playing Colonel Nick Alexander, the commander of the unit. This is Marvin's last appearance on screen before his death the next year. Together, Norris and Marvin portray the stress, the action, and the thrill of military flicks with the extreme anxiety of terrorist hijackings. Say what you will, but this movie holds up pretty well to date. Yes, Chuck uses his Uzi way more than his kicks, but it makes sense. He can't just karate chop terrorists who are holding him at gunpoint. Even though Roger Ebert gave this movie 3 stars out of 4, claiming it was a very well-made film that showcases what might happen in real life, it has a measly 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. Well, as you all know, sometimes you simply have to ignore the ratings and watch the movie just because you like what it's all about. The Cutter, 2005. Direct-to-video films never get much attention or appreciation because it's generally assumed that the movie isn't that good. However, The Cutter is different. At the ripe age of 65, Chuck Norris plays the role of John Shepard, a cop-turned-private detective. He ends up getting involved in a case where he has to track down a diamond cutter. Norris has to figure out things fast because a sacred biblical artifact and several ancient jewels are at stake. Overall, this movie is well-made and action-packed. The biggest reason why this movie is underrated is because a lot of fans feel like Norris doesn't showcase his martial arts talents in the movie like he used to. But then again, he's 65 years old, so what do you expect? Despite his age, Norris dominates the movie with his acting skills and charm. Whenever he's on screen, you genuinely can't look away. Sure, the kicks aren't as frequent as they used to be, and you can clearly see the stunt double in some of the scenes, but overall, this movie is pretty great. Walker, Texas Ranger, Trial by Fire, 2005. Walker, Texas Ranger ended in 2001. By that time, the TV show had garnered quite a bunch of loyal fans. That's why, when Norris and crew returned for the TV movie Walker, Texas Ranger, Trial by Fire, everyone was pleasantly surprised. Norris returned to his role as Captain Ranger Cordell Walker. While the old cast was back, the film focuses mainly on the new actors, especially Janine Turner. See, Turner's character, Ranger Kay Austin, was supposed to have her very own TV series. This movie was kind of like passing the baton to the younger generation. However, the movie received terrible ratings and the show was never made. But don't let those ratings fool you. This movie is quite entertaining in its own right. You've got Jeremy, a young boy who manages to get his hands on a guided missile system that his father once built. Unbeknownst to the young boy, 3 North Korean agents are after it. These agents break into his house and murder his father in front of him. Jeremy is able to run away from the agents, but they keep following them. The Rangers are slowly dragged into the mess when Ranger Francis Gage takes up Jeremy's case. You can definitely give this movie a watch as long as you don't mind cliffhanger endings. Breaker, 1979. With a tagline as badass as "Don't muck around with an 18-wheel trucker," you can definitely expect this 70s movie to be action-packed and cheesy as hell. Directed by Don Hewlett, Breaker follows the story of JD, a Californian trucker played by Norris, who ends up learning about a particular racket led by a corrupt sergeant that specifically targets truckers. When his younger brother goes missing after meeting the sergeant, JD goes after him with vengeance on his mind. Trucks and stunts. These are effectively the bread and butter of this movie. Even though it's fun to watch Norris using his martial arts to destroy this corrupt town, it's a bit hard to believe at times. When this movie was released, it grossed around $12 million at the box office with a budget of $250,000. In fact, Norris's paycheck for this movie was only $5,000. The entire film was shot in just 11 days, and despite all the negative criticism it received, people loved it. Most importantly, Chuck Norris's own father enjoyed this movie quite a bit. Braddock, Missing in Action 3, 1988. Although this particular film series didn't reach critical acclaim the way Rambo did, the Missing in Action films solidified Chuck Norris as an action movie star. So, with the success of the first 2 movies of the series, it was no surprise when Norris returned for Missing in Action 3 in 1988. The story was simple. Braddock didn't know that his wife, Lin Tan Kong, was alive back in Vietnam, but when he found out from a missionary after the Vietnam War ended that she was still alive with their son, Braddock decided to return to Vietnam to bring back his family despite the instructions of the higher-ups. What was supposed to be a family reunion quickly turned into a rescue mission as Braddock found several American Asian orphans who needed to be saved as soon as possible. Even though the premise of the film is extremely interesting, the movie, sadly, wasn't successful. It was the most well-made film of the series, yet it was the least successful financially. At one point, Norris considered breaking his contract because he wanted Cannon Films to do a better job of marketing this film. This movie definitely deserves a watch, especially for the second half of the film where action and sentiments are at their peak. Marvelous Verdict, And with that, we come to the end of our video, guys. Chuck Norris has an expansive filmography, and his movies are a blend of comedy, drama, thriller, and action. All the things that we love. We did our best to pick the 12 most underrated movies we could think of, but if you guys feel like we missed out on any hidden gems, feel free to let us know in the comments section down below. We're keeping an eye on them. Also, let us know which of these 12 films you enjoyed the most and why. This is Wizard Wheezy signing off for now, but until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.